Even the therapist will never leave me. At about 7 years of age, my family bought a farm. Well, my dad did. It was a complete surprise to my mom. He had the house picked out and everything. He even knew we would grow corn, soybean, and perhaps winter wheat. Our house was listed for sale and sold fast. We packed up a huge U-Haul and moved to Ohio. When we arrived at the farm, it was a complete wreck. The house was a disaster, needing everything. Dad began fixing everything, but gave special attention to the land that needed to be prepared for planting. The money went fast, and Mom gave her jewelry to be sold for the down payment and a used farm tractor. Dad worked non-stop, day and night, in the fields, but there was always something preventing him from getting crops into the ground. The soil wasn't nutrient-dense enough. There had been too much rain, too little rain. The tractor needed fixing, and on and on. Eventually, Mom gave Dad a declaration. Start the crops, or we're moving back to the city, and you will return to your old job. He jumped to it and got straight to planting the next day. At sunrise, he was on the tractor, tilling the earth. A day later, he was sowing seeds. Unfortunately, the tractor stopped in the middle of the field the day after. Mom could see smoke from the tractor from the back porch where she was hanging laundry. She called out to him to see what could be done. Dad yelled back not to worry, he could fix it. She told me to go see if he needed anything from the tool shed and do what I could to help. I ran into the field to be helpful and asked him if I could do anything. He said
nothing yet,
and told me I could sit on the tractor seat while he worked on the tractor. As a 7-year-old kid, sitting on the tractor while my dad worked on it was boss. Dad walked around looking for the cause of the problem and told me not to touch anything, just keep a lookout. I began to play like I was a farmer and pretended to turn the steering wheel. Then I guess I pulled on one of the levers and felt the tractor jerk backwards in an abrupt motion. I heard a grunt, but not anything very loud, so I didn't think much of it, and I crawled back down from the seat and looked under the tractor and saw half of my dad's body powerless and trapped beneath the giant tractor tire. He was still very conscious and told me to get Mom. I ran to the house as fast as my legs could carry me. I was in tears and I pushed through the door, and my mom instantly knew something was wrong. I tried hard to explain but couldn't, so I pointed out the door towards the field. She knew something terrible had happened and turned and bolted towards the tractor. She stumbled on the furrows and slipped in the mud as she ran. I saw her near the tractor fall to her knees. I got there just behind her, and I could hear my dad telling her everything would be okay. She was crying and holding him. His words became indistinct, but I could catch he was saying I love you even at my age. That morning, my dad took his last breath. I killed my dad that day. I was 12 years old when this occurred, and it still gives me goosebumps years later. I grew up on a large farm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. Rolling farmland as far as the eye can see. We grew corn and soybeans and had chickens, but my dad considered himself a goat farmer. He had lots of playful goats, which gave us good farm life. We sold goat milk and made cheese, of course. The meat was also sold. I helped Dad with many of the chores and enjoyed working with him. To my delight, he was always kind to the animals and played with them. My mom was a typical stay-at-home mom on the farm. She and I made bread together and baked pies for our desserts and to sell at the farmer's stand market on weekends. I liked the farm life, except I didn't have much freedom from my parents. They were always around, which meant I had no privacy and little time alone. One night, my parents had a dinner invitation with old friends in Columbus. About an hour away, I begged and begged to stay home, and at last, my mother agreed after what felt like forever. My dad wasn't thrilled, but Mom convinced him,
"You will be fine and you could call if anything came up."
I was euphoric to be at home alone for the first time. I felt my life was free. That evening, when both of my parents gave me a big hug and kissed me goodnight, Remember, keep your cell phone close, and if anything comes up, call us at the restaurant. Remember, 911 for all emergencies. Everything went in one ear and disappeared from thought. I was planning to watch Netflix, and I always got kicks out of the surfing YouTube and calling friends to chat. Regular 7th grade kind of stuff. I wouldn't really be alone anyhow, as we had a German Shepherd. His name was Shadow, and he was primarily gray-black and followed me like my shadow. Our house was a traditional farmhouse, but my mom liked a more modern feel, and since we were out in the middle of nowhere, we didn't have curtains on the windows. My mom wanted all the sunshine to come in, and through it, it created a modern, happy home. After 2 hours or so, my mom called to say they would be later than planned, as their friends wanted to see a movie after dinner, if it was okay with me. I told her I was fine, and was watching a movie with Shadow. Maybe an hour later, the movie ended, and Shadow got up and headed into the living room. I was thinking of getting a bowl of rice, cream from the freezer. When I heard Shadow barking, he probably saw a deer in the yard and didn't give much thought. But he wouldn't stop barking, so I yelled at him from the kitchen to be quiet. He just continued barking and wouldn't quiet down. So I went into the living room to let him out, and what I saw stopped me dead in my steps. A man in a clown mask with a huge bright red smile stood smack dab in the center of the living room window. It was my worst, chilling nightmare. A clown. He was creepy beyond words. In pure horror, I was frozen, and the clown in the window stared back at me. I screamed at Shadow, "Come!" and ran up the stairs. At the landing, I turned and saw the clown had his hands up and was waving with his head cocked to the side. He clearly was watching me as I ran. My parents' room was at the top of the stairs, and I ran in there, locking the door. I was crying and wanted my dad home. There was a landline on the nightstand, and I picked it up to call for help, but instantly I knew the line was dead. There was no dial tone. My parents had given me a cell phone, but it was in my room, down the hall from theirs. If I opened this door, the stranger in the Halloween mask would see me. But I had to chance it to get to the phone. I had no other choice. As I bolted to my room, I could see the window open, and the creepy clown was at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me. I screamed as loud as I had ever cried. Shadow was on my heels as we crashed into my room, locking the door. I could hear the clown's footsteps on the creaky stairs. Desperately, I dialed 911 and told the dispatch I need the police as fast as possible to get to the farm. The strange clown was outside my bedroom, and I could see the door handle wiggling back and forth. He never said a word, and that terrified me. The dispatch told me to remain calm and that the police officer would arrive in 6 minutes. Something in me made me say loudly, "So the police were here in 3 minutes." The door handle stopped wiggling, and all the sounds of anyone in the house became silent. My heart was pounding in my head. In less than 6 minutes, I heard the sirens of a police car. A minute later, I heard a policeman shouting in the house, "On the ground, hand behind your back." When they had him in cuffs and put him in the police car, an officer came for me, and we waited together for my parents, who had been notified of a break at our house by the dispatcher. Outside near the goat barn were strewn the bodies of our goats. They had been killed with a hunting knife, viciously stabbed and slashed. When the police arrested the slasher, he stood outside my bedroom door with no expression, just an unfocused gaze. His clothes were covered in blood. We never found out why he did what he did. We were informed that he would be imprisoned for 7 years. Mom and Dad discussed selling the farm before he was released, but he took his life in prison after a couple of years. This is a very old story that was told by my grandfather. He was born in Xenia, Ohio, 1910. It's still mostly farmland in Greene County. Much as in the early 1900s, most things have stayed the same today. In about 1925, There was a wealthy farmer who owned a lot of tobacco fields in the part of Ohio. Large, black barns were required to dry tobacco harvest, so this farmer would build a new barn on his property every time his wife gave birth. Each barn he built, he named after one of his children. By early 1930s, he had 6 children in 6 tobacco barns on his farm. He and his wife were expecting their 7th child, and life was beautiful. Unfortunately, the farmer's wife and unborn 7th child died in childbirth. Stricken with despair, the farmer could no longer attend to his farm. The grief was so grave he fell into a deep depression, and insanity soon followed. The farm quickly tumbled into disrepair, and the crop was lost. Without the crop, the farm began to go under. There was no money to care for the 6 remaining children. My grandfather said that in the abyss of despair and madness, the farmer carried each child, one by one, into the barn named for them. And with an axe, he murdered each child in turn. He dug a shallow grave for each of the small bodies in the center of the 6 barns he had named after each child. In the 7th barn, he had just completed for the expected child. He tied a rope from the rafter and hung himself. As a child, I asked my grandfather to take me to the barns, but he said they had been torn down long ago, and the land was sold off, all except the 7th barn. This barn was just abandoned and left to become overgrown in time. No one was interested in the barn because of the suicide of the insane farmer that took place there. The story for years was if you entered that barn at night, the ghost of the insane farmer could be seen swaying from a rope hanging from the rafters, forever living his demented atrocity. As time passed, people were still determining where the 7th barn was located. It was definitely Greene County though. There is speculation that it was near the old covered bridge or the old mill, now a restaurant, but who knows. A few years back, a group of ghost hunters claimed that they were able to determine the exact location of the supernatural 7th barn. They claimed that none of the barns were torn down, just that the land had been subdivided and sold to adjacent farmers. As recorded by them, they were able to derive the exact location. A key factor was that each of the barns in the area, they suspected, had their children's names carved on them. One night, the ghost hunters went to what they had determined was the 7th barn and set up a tripod and video camera, hoping to capture paranormal activity. The following day, the farmer who owned the abandoned barn saw a car parked near it and went to investigate. He discovered the bodies of ghost hunters who had snuck in the night before, hanging from the rafters. The police were notified, and the barn's location was never disclosed.